A warm welcome, everybody, to this last 2-hour session of Choosing Green. Now we are going to discuss a brave, sustainable world, the Nordic model under pressure. As earlier today, we have divided this session into 2 sessions or 2 topics, and we are still present in all the 5 Nordic capitals. Hence, we are in Copenhagen, where I am, and we are in Helsinki, we are in Oslo, we are in Reykjavik, and of course, Stockholm. So there you have it, a real nice Nordic bouquet. And now, without further ado, I would like to present our first topic for this session, namely green transition victims, how to leave no one behind. The statement is that a green transition is inevitable if we want a sustainable future. Then the question arises, how can it include all social groups? And how does it affect, or do we get all parts of the economy with us? How can we ensure a just transition? And is that even possible? Can we recalibrate the Nordic welfare model to balance out the needs of the green economy and a social, sustainable society? These are questions that we will try to answer during this event. And here to give us a presentation of, on the severity of climate change and how it already is affecting millions of people and the importance of social sustainable solutions. We are so lucky to have the Secretary General of Save the Children Sweden, Helena Tybell, with us, and she's joining us from Stockholm. Welcome, Helena, and the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Helena Tybell, and I am the CEO for Save the Children Sweden. But I am foremost a mother of a teenage son who worries about what the world will look like when he grows up. I want to be able to say to him that I have at least pulled my own weight. Because to deal with the climate crisis is the most important challenge of our lifetime. And it is our duty to our children and our moral obligation to deal with it. The Nordic welfare model, as we have come to understand and celebrate it, is characterized by strong social protection systems, high levels of equality, and a vibrant civil society. These are key to manage a just transition. But there is a lot of fixing that needs to be done. This said, our unique Nordic welfare model has provided us with very useful tools to manage the necessary transition, protecting the socially vulnerable, to make sure the burden of the transition is distributed in a just way and that no one is left behind. 31 years ago, the leaders of the world made a historic commitment by adopting the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Today, it is the most widely ratified human rights treaty in history. It has pushed governments to step up efforts to ensure that the rights of every child are realized. Yet, millions of children around the world, including the Nordic countries, are denied their basic rights. They continue to suffer the consequences of inadequate healthcare, education, and protection. A powerful driving force behind these violations is climate change and governments' inability to tackle the root causes and impacts of global climate and environmental crisis. Climate change arguably poses the single greatest challenge to the realization of children's rights. Children, they have contributed the least to the climate and environmental crisis, but they are paying the highest price, especially the poorest and most marginalized who are harmed first and worst. Save the Children believes that building stronger communities is essential to building resilience to the climate crisis. One way of achieving this is to invest in universal social protection systems that benefits everyone. The Nordic countries have a long history of applying rights-based social protection schemes, many of which have proven invaluable in times of crisis. Systems for targeted support are often expensive and sometimes fail to reach the most marginalized, whereas universal social protection systems, such as universal child benefits, have a better chance of reaching the most vulnerable. Over time, universal systems can become more sophisticated with electronic registers and payouts that allow for higher payments for lower income families and additional payments in times of crisis. The principle of leave no one behind is central in the 2030 agenda and a precondition to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Progress must be judged according to how well the groups that are furthest behind are advancing. The ongoing pandemic has demonstrated that the world is falling short of this commitment. Yet we have seen how countries with strong social protection schemes have coped better than others, as they have structures in place that allow them to act quickly and far-reaching. Yet across the world, we are seeing a challenge to existing rights-based social protection schemes with an increased focus on conditional and reduced welfare. From a child rights perspective, these trends are worrying. These changes are also noticeable in the Nordic welfare countries, in the Nordic countries. Save the Children has, in numerous reports, emphasized how the restructuring and the cutback of Swedish social protection schemes have left vulnerable children further behind. Universal schemes that previously contributed to the resourcing of families with low incomes and protecting them from wretched poverty have been pulled back, leaving some of our country's most vulnerable children without adequate protection and support. At the same time, we are witnessing a global trend of restrictions of civic space. This is another serious concern in reaching a just green transition, as civil society organizations act as watchdogs over policy formulation and implementation. We should not forget that many of the innovations that characterize the Nordic welfare model have been innovated by civil society and later adopted by the state. Civil society also provides opportunities for self-expression and dialogue. The global school strikes for the future has shown the power of children, leading the way on climate change through a truly global movement, and the strength and dynamism of their ideas and activism. Save the Children supports thousands of children around the world to exercise their rights to speak out, campaign, and hold governments and other actors to account. Unfortunately, not everyone welcomes children's participation, and activists such as Greta Thunberg frequently become targets of ridicule, threats, and even abuse. This is unacceptable, and it is our responsibility as adults to not only listen to children, but also to empower them and protect their rights to organize and speak out. No one knows what the future holds, but we know our governments are not doing enough fast enough to prevent some of the worst climate change impacts from materializing in our children's lifetime. In summary, I really hope that this ongoing pandemic encourages decision makers to be bold and to listen to children. Let the children and their organizations be part of this process and let them have their say on how to fulfill the commitments. Empower and strengthen civil society innovation and collaboration, a precondition for the Nordic welfare system to fully work. And finally, fix the holes by investing in public service and welfare model so that no one is left behind. The systems are complex and they need to be more accurate to reach the most marginalized groups. Only then can we achieve a truly just green transition that puts welfare and rights of children and other vulnerable groups at the heart of climate and environmental policies and actions. There is still hope. The children are our hope, but we need to act here and now for the future. Saving our children is saving our future. Thank you for your time.
And thank you, Helena, for those powerful words. I promise to take them with me to the discussion that we are going to have shortly. But first, I'd like to welcome to our digital stage member of the European Parliament from Sweden and the Green Party, Alice Bah Kuhnke. She's joining us to give us a European perspective. A warm welcome to you, Alice.
Hi, thank you.
I can't see you at the moment, but I can definitely hear you. I would like to start with your thoughts on what we just heard from Helena Tubell. Listen to the children, she said. What do you think?
I can only agree with every word that Helena Tubell said and what she expressed. And from an EU perspective, we are, just as she said, we, the politicians, we are doing a lot, but we are not doing what is needed, and we are not doing enough of what is needed. And the social economical gap that is widening, that is getting bigger in Europe and within the EU is a huge threat towards a just transition and towards creating the greener world that we are in so big need of.
What should the EU do more of? You said you're not doing enough, you're not doing it fast enough. What do you lack in this work, or the EU?
Yes, it's obvious that we are very good in putting nice words on paper. We have so many fantastic documents telling everybody that we are in a climate crisis or in a state of emergency, and we are talking about leave no one behind. But then when it comes to really doing it, then we are not brave enough, and the willingness is not there. I mean, we are right now still investing our taxpayers' money into fossil fuels. Still, even though we know that we should invest them into green economy, and still, even though we know that before the pandemic, it was 160 million people in Europe living on the limit of poverty or under the limit of poverty. 116 million people within Europe before the pandemic. So it's clear that we must address the fact that people will be forced to choose between paying the electricity bill or giving their children food in Europe. So then we politicians must do so much more when it comes to really fighting poverty, because if we don't, we won't be able to do any transition of our whole society.
So what do you think is EU's main challenge when it comes to creating creating action like you want to see it?
I think the main challenge is that we are still stuck in the old way of thinking, and we are still stuck in the way we look at the economy, and we are not brave enough, or we are not desperate enough. Some of us are, but we are awful like being seen as hysteric or dramatic, but we are in a climate crisis. We are in a state of emergency. And it will be the poor people within Europe and within the world that will pay the bill, because we, rich people, as I am, we can always pay ourselves. In the end, it will strike us too. But we need politicians, and we need pressure on us politicians that from the people saying that we know this is going in the wrong direction. So you need to do much more and do it now.
So what kind of role then can the Nordic countries play within the EU and also on a global scale to ensure that we leave no one behind in this green transition?
I think, I'm such a proud patriot for being from the Nordics. And I think that we should take a lead. I think that we are not as active as we could be. I think that we should demand to be in the forefront. We are welfare states, so we can show by example that this is possible, because they are looking at us and they say that if not the Nordic countries are doing it, are not brave enough to do it, why should we then? So we really, this is our task. We need to be in the forefront. We need to be best in class. Everything less is unworthy.
Thank you, Alice Baukunke. I know you have a busy day and must leave us shortly, but please stay as long as you have the time, because now shortly we're going to bring all the Nordic countries into the discussion.
Thank you.
And now for the discussion. I would like here in Copenhagen to invite Jonas Fergman to the stage. He's a 20-year-old student who has spent several years engaging in climate politics within various sectors such as academia, policy, and business. In Helsinki, we have Kamila Sultanova, a public speaker, mentor, and cultural architect. And with her is Nicolas Kojola, former president of the Nordic Youth Council. In Oslo, we have Bernt Apeland, Secretary General of the Red Cross in Norway. And in Stockholm, we have Emma Lindgren from Ashoka, which is the world's largest network for social entrepreneurs. Emma is the director of Ashoka Nordic. And beside her, we have Ahmed Abdirahman. He's a policy expert on social sustainability at the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce. He's also CEO and founder of Global Village Foundation. And finally, in Reykjavik, we have Adalbjørg Egilsdottir, who is Iceland's UN Youth Delegate on climate change. And I'm going to start with Reykjavik and you, Adalbjørg. The fact that we have this discussion is that we are aware of the possibility that people can be left behind in the green transition. But as Helena Tubell pointed out, there are already people left behind here in the Nordics. Inequality is increasing everywhere. There are glitches even in our seemingly well-functioning system. How do you think we can use the green transition to lift children, young people, and vulnerable groups that are already left behind, and at the same time secure that we don't create new groups that can't keep up with the pace of the green transition?
Thank you. I have a few points on this that I would like to discuss. First, when we talk about a just green transition, we need to keep in mind who are we talking about? Are we just talking about people in the Nordics, the people in our countries, which of course have to be included, but we also have to keep in mind that the carbon emissions from the Nordics are not located only locally in the Nordics. A lot of our carbon emissions and a lot of our pollution is happening elsewhere in the world, and we also need just transition for the people that are producing the goods that we use and buy every day. The second point that I want to come into is education. I believe that education is a great tool to make sure that no one is left behind. We both need to re-educate people on environmental matters, on ecology, just on all the dangers that ecological disasters can have on both the earth and on people and other species, of course. We also need to have re-education for those who need it because they might lose their jobs because of our green transition. For example, different education for farmers that need to change their their agricultural habits, or education for people that work in the oil industry in Norway and elsewhere, so that they can find jobs in new sectors. And also encourage people to go back to school. We don't have to get stuck into the same job forever, and this can also increase innovation, which we need on a global scale. I also think that we need to include young people more, not only in words, but also in real life. Invite us a seat at the table and really listen to us. Take what we have to say to heart, and also make space for young people in positions of power, whether it's inside the parliament or inside businesses. And I believe that with those three things, education, just transition, not only in the Nordics, but also globally, especially in those countries where we buy our products from, and then to include youth, can bring us a long way.
Thank you, Adalbjørg. I just want to say that to all of you, feel free to step into the discussion whenever you feel like it. I will try to keep my eyes on the screen here to see if you wave your hand. But while you dwell on that, I'm going to go to Helsinki and Kamila Sultanova. I know you have some strong views on how the Nordic countries are dealing with people that has been left behind or maybe never was invited to the party. Are we a little bit too self-righteous in the Nordics?
It's a big pleasure to be here as a Dane living in Helsinki in Finland. I have lived experiences in Aarhus, in a ghetto, if you will, in Hässleholm, and now I live in Vuosaari, which is Eastern Helsinki, home of 40% people who speak other language than Finnish or Swedish. So there is a very, as you say, Andre, righteous approach to feel that there is no inequality here. We are equal country, gender equal, and everyone is promised a social mobility lift based on the Finnish school promise. And I want to raise the level of debate we have here to a different level, as also a colleague from Iceland says, who is it that we're leaving behind? Who is it? Is it people who need to go through digital transformation and small, middle-sized companies? Is it immigrants who are not allowed to the job market because of structural racism in education and job market? Or is it people who are living, the airline personnel? And we've heard different target groups being present here. And my solution to this, as a cultural architect, I work across different sectors with education institutions here in Helsinki, municipalities. I work with civil society and businesses to really bring that social cohesion together and say representation matters, because we want to keep that beautiful feeling of trust. Social capital is what Nordic countries are really proud of. We trust institutions, but unfortunately in education and the job market, we see a lot of exclusion going on, and we need to fix the approach and the policies that we shape in the Nordics. So let me give you one example here. There has been a review of Nordic policies on immigration and migrants, and all of the Nordic countries look at immigration except Finland, they look at it as a competitive advantage. But most countries look at immigration as a problem. Immigrants is a passive stakeholder in society, and it's also a way to, all the policies are shaped to protect the welfare and protect the culture. But we are here in a sense that I work as a volunteer. I built my path to, standing here today is really being the Nordic identity, is really through civic engagement. And I do see that the social change making, the civic engagement is like a gateway for all the people of different society stakeholders, immigrants, refugees, international students, spouses that I work with here. They need to really know how Nordic countries can be open source. And we forgot how to really empower them in our policies. And if we shape that, we can really bring in the collaborations that we spoke already today in the morning, and have the collaborations with those stakeholders who are not present in the room. And that will shape who gets to decide, shape the future municipality policies, and so that it really represents the lived experiences as an immigrant, as a migrant, and as a young person, that we all need to really bring that radical thinking into motions. Yeah.
Thank you, Camilla. I hope you hear this in Stockholm, Emma Lindgren, building on what Camilla just said. Can we recalibrate the Nordic welfare model to balance out the needs of the green economy and the socially sustainable society? And how do we do that?
Thank you for that question and for inviting me. So I definitely think we can and we should, and I'm glad to hear that from Alice Kunk and the other panelists as well, that they have the same approach. I think we have, as a Nordic market, a big power with about 25 million inhabitants compared to the smaller countries that we are separately, that we can become much more powerful together, of course, towards the EU and OECD, etc., to put pressure on those institutions as well. And then I also think that within each country, we can use each other much, much more in, building on the strengths that we see somewhere else and put a pressure on our decision makers that Finland is doing this, then we can do this as well, for instance. So definitely, and then just building on what was just said around change making, as I represent Ashoka Nordic, which is a network for social entrepreneurs and change makers. That is a lot what we see in our network is a new type of inequality, which is very much building upon the inequality that we've seen for centuries. Between wealth and those that have it and those that doesn't. And this new inequality is also grounded on those that are feeling that they're part of this ever-changing society that we live in and feel that they can grasp it and contribute to it, and those that feel that they're left behind, that are more victims to the circumstances. And that's, of course, not okay. And we need to bring this group into those that feel that they have the power to contribute with. And we know from our 40 years of supporting the social entrepreneurs that there are a lot of models out there that shows that we can empower so many of these groups to step into their kind of greatness and know that they can be part of a positive transformation. I think I'll leave it like that for now.
Thank you, Emma. And I can see, I think it's Camilla who raised her hand there in Helsinki.
I do.
Go ahead, Camilla.
Emma, as Ashoka, you represent a huge pool of social entrepreneurs. And I remember in the summer taking part in a United Nations volunteer conference, really promoting social change makers, social entrepreneurs, and volunteers to become a stakeholder in reaching SDGs. How do you see that happening as Ashoka? Could that be a way to really channel the attention? Because we know volunteering is a 3 billion euro revenue just in Finland alone. How can that be as an also a way to bring in the social innovations and change maker power to be part of this leaving no one behind narrative?
Great, thanks for that question. I think, the solutions for the transitions, they are already in there. I think it's more about making sure that they get the investment needed and that collaboration happens within those solution parts, because there are, we have to tackle the challenge from so many ends. So that there's investment in those, so that there's no, competition, which there is a lot of today, but rather, complementing solutions that can strengthen each other. And I think so that's one part of it, like strengthen those solutions. And then the other part is to work much more on a bottom-up approach with making sure that anyone, especially children and youth, get to train these, what we call change maker muscles, which is to train their ability to problem solve, to be empathic, to be creative, work in teams, and so on. And so that they could, I already now as teenagers, and we have so many examples of that around the world, step up into their power and become a change maker. So I think we'll have to work on both those, system changing solutions, strengthen them, and as well as empower the broader masses. I don't know if I answered your question correctly, but those are some insights at least.
I would like to introduce one of our other panelists, Ahmed Abdirahman. You are also with us from Stockholm, and you're working with policy making and integration. And I was thinking, in times of crisis, we should stand together. But so often we see the opposite. Even now, under the pandemic, people are unable to stand together by keeping apart. Immigrants are accused of being super spreaders. So how do we avoid that kind of friction when we're talking about green transition?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And this is very important questions. I mean, how do we make sure that we are not leaving people behind as we try to move towards a sustainable future, may it be social, economic, or environmental? When it comes to immigrants or vulnerable groups, it's usually the case that everything that is bad is directed toward us. And when we look right now what's happening around the world politically, the movement that we are seeing in both in the Americans, but also across Europe, is that politicians, far-right groups are taking advantage of immigrants to blame for every possible problem. And we cannot fall into that conversation when we are dealing right now with the COVID-19. If anything, the COVID-19 has proven that the Nordic countries and many parts of the world are really lacking behind in making sure that everybody has the same opportunity and chance from being protected from the crisis. When we look at the COVID-19, we see, for example, that the people who have in higher degree have either died or been infected has been the low income groups, the most vulnerable groups, many of them being right now foreign-born populations. If you look at in Sweden, as an example, we have seen the area that I live in right now in Stockholm, the suburbs, there are higher cases of COVID-19 in the spring. We hope it will not be the same repeated mistakes this time as we see now the COVID-19 increases. But to be honest with you, if we are not able to address issues of inclusion, issues of social sustainability, we're not going to solve the economic or the environmental crisis. And I feel that we in the Nordic countries, may it be Sweden or other countries, are too proud to really talk the truth about inclusion and immigrants. We always want to talk about them, but not with them. And that's why at the Global Village, at the Järvaveckan, for example, one of our biggest political events, we're trying to find ways to talk to each other, not about each other, but together. If we are able, if we're gonna share this common future, no matter where we come from, our path to Sweden has looked different. Our path to other countries in Nordic countries have been different, but our future is the same. And unless we understand that, we're not gonna solve these issues. But we need an honest conversation, and we need data. We try to do data. For example, the Global Village produced this report where we the first time map the people who live in the vulnerable areas that everybody's talking about, the so-called ghettos. Even the language we use is dividing. So we have to make sure that we have a conversation that includes everybody, and where diversity, both in voices, in backgrounds, is recognized if we're going to solve this. And right now, I don't think either Sweden or the Nordic countries are there yet. We're afraid of addressing issues of inclusion because we feel afraid either being called racist or being or having inclusion and diversity something that is on the side, not something that is in our daily life, at labor markets, at the civil society, at the schools. Everywhere I look at the Agenda 2030, we are lacking behind when it comes to these vulnerable groups in our countries. We have to be honest about that. Otherwise, we are just wasting our time.
Thank you, Ahmed. I think we're going to point our noses to the global situation. And I want to turn my attention to Oslo and Bernt G. Apeland, Secretary General of the Red Cross Norway, because today the International Red Cross released a new report, World Disaster Report 2020. The report shows that there were 308 disasters in 2019. Some 100 million people were affected by it. And 20 of the most affected countries from climate change do not have the resources to save the most vulnerable, most of them being women and children. And Bernt, how do you think the international community and the rich countries have reacted to this situation?
Thank you, André, and thank you to all the other panelists that have given very thoughtful comments. I think it's tempting to start with a typical political phrase, too little, too late. And that basically sums up how we are reacting to the climate change and the climate crisis, both when it comes to dealing with the consequences that are there here and now, as you just mentioned, and I'll come back to a little bit later. But also when it comes to planning for the green shift. If you look at the world today, it's alarming. As you said, there was more than 300 disasters last year. But even more telling is that if you compare the numbers of climate and weather-related disasters in the 1990s with the last decade, the increase is about 35%. And there's no sign that the increase will stop. So it means that the challenge is here and the challenge is now. And as you said, the consequences are hitting unevenly. It hits the most vulnerable states and the most vulnerable populations. And so far, we have not been able to tackle that in a forceful manner. If you look at Somalia, it's a nation that has been ridden with conflict for more than 30 years, and where the climate change is really already manifesting itself in real human suffering. It's the most vulnerable nation on Earth, but it's not even on the top 50 nations receiving funding for climate adaptation, for disaster risk reduction, or helping their most vulnerable population. So I think if you look at the Nordics, I mean, we are definitely probably the region that is best suited to succeed with the green shift, because we are not as hard hit as the rest of the world. We have well-functioning welfare systems. We have a well-educated population, and we have a lot of trust in the society, which has already been mentioned. And I think that yes, we can of course help other nations to build similar systems, but this will take time, and this is time we don't have. So I think that first and foremost, Nordic societies should increase even more their support to disaster risk reduction, climate adaptation, and to the most vulnerable nations on the world. The top 20 most vulnerable nations in the world do not receive they don't receive almost anything to help their own population in this regard. I think this is probably one of the most pressing issues that the Nordic societies should take responsibility for now. I think I'll stop there. I would love to come back later a little bit with the other comments, but I'll stop there now, Andre.
Thank you, Bernd. I would like to take it back to Copenhagen now, because here on the stage with me is Jonas, and I lost my script here now. But anyway, when I talked to you some days ago, we talked about consumption. We think of the Nordic countries as clean and green. But then you said, really, we are pigs.
Yeah.
Why?
Because we consume way more than any other region on the earth per capita. If every single region of the earth would consume at the rate that we are doing, we would end up finishing the world resources way quicker. We have this Earth Day we mark, I think it's in March already, actually now, April, that the WWF they mark every year. And it shows out that every person lives like we do in the Nordics. The Earth Day, which is the day that marks the end of the Earth's natural produced resources in 1 year, will end up in February already. When you see the goals like goal 12, which is sustainable production and consumption of the SDGs, we're doing terribly in the Nordic and the Baltic region, as proven by many reports lately by the CBSS, and Nordic Sustainability made a report a few years back. So it's, yeah, I'm pretty much just saying how it is.
So we need to cut back on consumption.
Yeah,
we're too greedy.
Greedy would probably be a bit of a weird way to put it. I would put it like we are so content and conform in the way of life. We can't even fathom a way to eat differently. It could also be instead of buying tomatoes produced in Brazil and flown in, we could just eat locally here in Denmark. And then we don't have to eat tomatoes all year, or we don't have to have 3 cars all with gasoline. It could be electric. It could be, so it's not just about consuming, it's also about consuming recklessly and throwing out and not reproducing, not reusing. It's like, so, and we are just by fact the worst offenders of this behavior on Earth.
We have such a large panel here today, so we have one left actually. Nicholas Koila, you are with us from Helsinki, and I want to ask you. I mean, you have been a president of the Nordic Youth Council. When you meet your fellow youth politicians, is consumption and fair distribution, is it something you talk about?
Of course, it's an important issue that we talk about, and we acknowledge the fact that we are the area on the globe that consumes the most. The fact is that we don't consume products that are produced in the Nordics. We consume a lot of products that are produced somewhere else. And this is something that we definitely see as a fact, and something that, for example, the Nordic Youth Council during my presidency last year worked with a lot. Of course, our policy making was not as easy to do as normal years due to the pandemic and the fact that everybody had to make an extra effort to be able to produce their policy making basically in the Nordic region. There's still a lot of adapting to do, but the Nordic Youth Council has seen this, or saw it as a very important part to address the fact, for example, through the work we do with biodiversity. The Nordic Youth Council and the Nordic Youth Movement for Biodiversity has grown hugely last year, and I think consumption and climate change are a very central part to put together, but we cannot forget about the biodiversity, because that is really where we are robbing the earth. We're really taking away from the earth's natural habitat, all the animals, all the plants around the world, especially around the equator. This is some really critical areas, and of course our rainforest. So there's a lot of things that we've addressed, and of course a lot of things we talk about, and unfortunately I feel like we still have a lot to do to get to there, the point where we're actually not talking about it, but also doing much more for it.
Thank you, Nicholas. Our time is actually coming to a close. There's so many people in this debate. I'm so sorry, but thank you, everybody. And we need to get our audience on board as well. So now we're actually opening for questions from the audience and also from our viewers online.
Can you hear me?
Now, I think we have a question from one of the audiences. I'm not quite sure where it is. It was such a close-up. I think it's Helsinki. Go ahead, Helsinki.
Can I talk? Yeah, do you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So I'm Nadia, and thank you all for a great discussion, really interesting topic. My question is, how can we push for awareness regarding the growing inequality in the Nordics?
I could answer that.
Yeah. You want to answer?
Yes, I could say that because, like I said, we need to recognize that both with issues of biodiversity and growing inequality, they need to be put on as a risk management issue for businesses, for politicians, and not everyone in public sector can solve this issue alone. So I work with storytelling. I work with Global Dignity NGO to bring in the students, to bring in young people who don't know a word about SDGs. It is really like growing that visibility and stay vigilant to say, we have communities just in Helsinki alone where there is so high in unemployment. So we need to promote photo and voice methodology, basically let them do videos, let them engage them in participatory approach, give them young people, really bring them into urban spaces where they would never belong. Let's say NASDAQ, we have done those events. And also when we're talking about experimentation in policy making or in public sector, public-private partnership, we need a critical size of change makers who can actually make it happen. If you're so little working on inequality and people have very little lived experiences, what exclusion feels like in the Nordics, you're not going to do it alone. So to tackle issues of inequality, storytelling, more media visibility, more partnerships with young people, with underrepresented groups, and also more money and mandate for those young people and those underrepresented groups to be in the room so that we can actually bring legitimacy to all the money that is pumped in right now to say, how can we bring more diversity? How can we bring more inclusion? How can each city municipality in Copenhagen, in Finland or in Sweden or Denmark, everyone is fighting for the same global talent to make money in those communities. So I really hope that we can make those initiatives which are on small public funding to permanent practice. Not mentoring really works. I'm a product of mentoring in Denmark as an immigrant woman. I got mentored in European Parliament. So why do we always have so little money on something that is just amazing and it's proven impact, proven empowerment, proven personal agency to everyone? So I really hope that anyone who hears, and business people should have been here right now, that we could really bring this forward and become change makers already from the school age and secondary school, I would say.
I think Ahmed, you wanted to say something as well?
Yes, I mean, the issue of inequality is one of the most important thing to address if we're ever going to succeed in addressing sustainability. And I think that there is, how do you say this in a good way, there is a lack of acknowledgement how important this question is. Because everywhere we see right now why we have instability in democratic countries is because people feel that they are not a part of the equation. They feel left behind. And we're talking about people in the countryside. We're talking people who lost their job because of fast technology and transition from dirty industrial work to clean energy-based industries. If you don't get those people, if you don't get the people from the countryside, if you don't get the poor people a part of this equation, we're not going to solve these issues. So it's very important to address the issue of inequality. And to do that, we need to have data. And this is one of the biggest problems. I mean, Sweden and Nordic countries, we are the wealthiest when it comes to data. We have enormous, tremendous data, but we don't want to show data breaking down on subgroups. For example, when I looked right now at the Agenda 2030, the Statistic Agency of Sweden has done annual evaluation. And again, everywhere you look, you see that people who are foreign born, especially born outside of Europe, they are the ones suffering from everything from pollution, because they live in areas where the pollution is more common. They are the one who are going to be the last people to transit from cars that are fossil fueled run to electric cars. So you have like subgroups that are constantly feeling outside. It's 26 times more likely right now, children of immigrants in Sweden today to live under economic, how do you say, help from the government, 26 times compared to children who are born with Swedish parents. These children are the ones we are talking about who are our futures. But those who are foreign born, 26 times more likely to live in a household where their parents are dependent on government aid, 26 times. 50% of all the kids who are foreign born between ages 0 and 19 live in households that they have to have government aid. And 30% of all people who are living in Sweden right now under overcrowdedness are in the suburbs where more vulnerable groups live in. These kids are the one who are going to share our future and who's going to help Sweden and the rest of the world to transit to a better future. And if these two groups of kids now in Nordic countries and around the world, grow up in such unequal opportunities, unequal future, we're not going to solve the issues. We're going to actually increase the polarization. So to addressing these issues with data, with knowledge, inclusion is key if we are going to make sure that no one is left behind. And I'm not sure that we are really making sure this is a priority, because we are focusing more on the green part of the sustainability and the economic, but never about the people, especially the vulnerable groups who are coming to this country.
Thank you.
Can I add a bit on that, since we're in Stockholm? Or do you have another plan, Andre?
We do have another question. So if we're going to have time for that, but you might be able to answer that one. So we have a question from one of our online viewers. What are your thoughts on basic income? Anyone feel tempted to answer that one? Emma? Adalbjörg, go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you. I really like the idea of basic income. I think it can reduce inequality, because and also if we have basic income, people are less likely to get stuck in jobs where they're only working for the money and not for the joy of it. It's a tool that we can use to help lift those in more vulnerable communities up and help them to gain education and better rights. So I think a basic income could be a really powerful tool for us to reduce inequality between groups.
I'm actually going to send that question to you, Bernd Upland, as well. I mean, if we think in a global scale here, rich countries are giving poor countries aid, and we see so much corruption and so much that don't really work. Could actually a guaranteed kind of basic income to the people living in vulnerable areas or poor countries, could that be a way to kind of recalibrate that model as well?
Thank you, Andre, for putting that challenge to me. It's a little bit out of the scope of what typically a humanitarian organization would focus on. But let me say that I think that one of the things that really started to build the Norwegian welfare state, at least, was the creation of local social security benefits. And if you look at the work of international humanitarian organizations now, more and more, our response to different disasters, be it climate related or other, is actually to give cash contributions and to the populations. And the reason for doing that is that it gives, first of all, the dignity to the person to make their own choices in their lives for themselves and their families. And it contributes to local markets and thus also building the local society. So in that sense, I would really advocate for a solution that could be similar to basic income. But I'm not sure that this is something that we as a humanitarian organization would advocate for. But cash contributions to people in disasters is definitely a way to go.
Okay, Jonas Bergman, you have like 20
Short time.
seconds.
Fine. We don't have to talk about basic income. This is a band-aid solution. Try and fix them all. The issue is that if we send money to the global south and they still produce for our benefits, then we continue to make this cycle incomplete. We don't solve actually the climate crisis. I want to go back to the subject at hand, which is choosing green. The green transition is not just compensating people who are losing their jobs. It is creating new markets or empowering local markets that are trying to be more green. So for example, fair trade, the Timmermans transition bill with the Green New Deal we have in EU. There are so many things we can do instead of just subsidizing people who are losing their jobs, help creating new markets that we're already empowering. Instead of talking about how we can pay off our mandates to the global south, we can empower their local markets, force ourselves to have more local markets, and thus completely break this inevitably bad thing for the climate, which is producing for people in a different global hemisphere, Nordic hemisphere. And we are also in the south. It also empower them to also empower even the people who are outside of the norm, who are losing this inequality. We create new jobs. We secure new jobs that are benefit for the future jobs, not just creating new jobs that are a band-aid for the next generation, but actually for the multiple generations. I know I'm across my 20 seconds, but this is actually what the green transition is all about.
Thank you, Jonas. It always amazes me how Danish seconds are so much longer than the Norwegian ones. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for a really interesting discussion. Now we have reached the end of this topic, and we will be back after a short break. Welcome back, everybody, to Choosing Green and our last topic of the day. Nordic Welfare State, green, inclusive, and great. We're going to discuss if our welfare states are better equipped than other systems to create a sustainable future, or if it's overregulated and should leave more room for the market. Is the Nordic model overrated and not as good as its reputation, or can it be exported to others? One thing is certain. In a post-corona world, the need for well-proven, cost-effective, and inclusive green solutions are bigger than ever. But will it be the Nordics that lead the way and are with the first past the post to reach the national goals to fulfill the Paris Agreement? Here to challenge us on this topic is Associate Professor in Nordic Studies at the University of Helsinki, Johan Strang. He's joining us from our hub in Helsinki. A warm welcome to you, Johan. And may I say, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the opportunity to speak in front of this distinguished panel. Climate change is a topic that we need to approach with humility. The Nordic countries might do well in many international rankings, but we're definitely struggling when it comes to carbon footprint per capita. But I'm not here as an expert on climate change. I was invited here to talk about the Nordic model and about Nordic cooperation. And I've chosen to focus on the welfare state as a tool for social and technological change. I think it's important to remember that from a historical perspective, the Nordic welfare state was a response to dramatic challenges in the early and mid-20th centuries, a period of massive social transformations, industrialization, urbanization, and fragmentation of traditional peasant societies. In many places, these challenges led to revolutions, political turmoil, and war. The Nordic countries avoided much of that, not by sticking their head in the sand, but by embracing change and by proactively modernizing and transforming their societies, and by including everyone in this process. This proved to be a very successful strategy. It equipped the Nordic countries with tools to succeed in a constantly evolving world. It turned out that modernization of society is not only more peaceful, but also more effective when everyone is included. The Nordic welfare state is characterized by strong mechanisms of inclusion, universal social benefits, strong public sector, active district policies, an emphasis on culture, education, and research, close but arm's length connection to the labor market parties, and a strong popular participation in decision-making. The Nordic model of democracy does not mean that the elected politicians decide everything by themselves. Instead, they base their decisions on a continuous dialogue with experts, interest organizations, and popular movements. This intimate relationship between the state and the civil society can be seen as an early form of crowdsourcing. New ideas were picked up and supported by the state. This made the Nordic societies flexible, even avant-garde when it comes to safety matches, mobile technology, or wind in energy. It also facilitated for a continuous but socially sustainable transformation of the Nordic societies. To sum up, the Nordic welfare model has been the tool by which the Nordic countries have turned challenges into opportunities. This was what happened with industrialization, with the knowledge society, and globalization. And it can also certainly happen with our current pressing challenge of building a greener future. Then a few words about Nordic cooperation. The Nordic model is not the result of a common Nordic genetic disposition. The fact that our Nordic societies look so similar is the result of a long history of intimate connections between actors in the different Nordic countries. Nordic cooperation has been a forum for negotiating common solutions, for harmonizing social legislation and environmental policies. More often, however, Nordic cooperation has been a matter of sharing experiences and learning from each other. Scholars have repeatedly emphasized the importance of this Nordic comparative framework in relation to the Nordic welfare state. Characteristic of Nordic cooperation is that it takes place not merely at the highest political level, but at all levels of society, including administration, political parties, the business sector, researchers and experts, and associational life. It's often argued that Nordic cooperation is much more than the Nordic Council or the Council of Ministers. And this is certainly true, but at the same time, the Nordic Council of Ministers has an absolutely central role in maintaining this Nordic cobweb of cooperation where we share best practices in the Nordic countries. The Nordic model raises a lot of interest and is rightly a great source of pride for us all. I am, however, concerned that the Nordic is turning into an attribute that we use for everything that we think is cool and great. That it is becoming detached from the idea of Norden as a transnational community, detached from Nordic cooperation. We are very interested in emphasizing the Nordicness of our nation and our policies and our products, but we are not so interested in what the other Nordic countries are doing, in learning from them or in doing things together. So my provocative question, therefore, is whether this recent vision of Norden as the world's most sustainable and integrated region in 2030 is about branding the Nordics as global frontrunners in the green transition, or about furthering Nordic cooperation on these crucial issues. I'm asking because I cannot tell. There are many positive signals, but the cuts in the cultural sector contribute to the deinstitutionalization and projectification of Nordic cooperation, threatening the bottom-up structures that we need in order to transform society in an effective and socially sustainable way. But I look forward to hearing more. Finally, a word of comfort for those who think that the pandemic has permanently damaged Nordic cooperation. We have always been disappointed with Nordic cooperation. The periods that we today celebrate as the golden epochs of Nordic cooperation were actually periods of Nordic distress. The Nordic Council, the Passport Union, the Common Labour Market were created after the collapse of the Scandinavian Defence Union at a time when the Cold War was pulling the Nordics apart. The Helsinki Treaty was signed in the wake of a failed customs union. The Nordic Council of Ministers was founded on the ruins of a plan for a Nordic economic union. All great achievements of Nordic cooperation have been made in order to rescue Nordic cooperation from oblivion. So this depressing history is important because the current state of disappointment is a massive opportunity to push Nordic cooperation forward. From this perspective, Norden certainly has a chance of becoming the world's most sustainable and integrated region by 2030. Thank you.
And thank you, Johan Strang, for some interesting views and some interesting questions that we will try to answer for you when we get into the discussion. But before we get there, I would like to welcome Anna Lundgren, Senior Research Fellow at Norega, to our stage in Stockholm. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you so much, Andre, for this introduction. And I will depart from the regional scale. At Nordics, where I work, we depart from the regional scale in many of our analysis. And that is the regional level is below the national level, but above the local level. And this is also the perspective that I would like to take here when we talk about the green transition and the possibilities for the Nordics to be green, inclusive, and great. As you know, urbanization and aging population are two of the major trends in the Nordic region. And demography and urbanization both have very large impacts on the conditions for living and working in different regions across the Nordic territory. From research, we know that in general, urban regions have a growing and younger population with higher education, higher income, and many also live longer and healthier lives in urban regions. But we also know that this is not the case in all urban regions. On the other hand, we also know that many of the rural regions are coping with difficulties such as aging population, decreasing population, and lack of economic resources. But in our data, we also find thriving rural regions with strong business and tourism sector, with second homes, and regions in rural areas attracting young people in their 30s to move back. So my first point here is that we should acknowledge the diversity between different parts of the Nordic region. Johan talked about the Nordic region as a whole, and here I mitigate the Nordic region into different kinds of urban regions and different types of rural regions. And furthermore, I think it's very important that we understand what's going on at this regional level, since that to a very large extent frames the possibilities for living and working in different parts of the Nordic territory, and also for health and well-being, and for the potential of being green, inclusive, and great. And if you want to learn more about different rural and urban regions across the Nordic territory, please look into the State of the Nordic Region or the special issue on health and well-being and digitalization that was published earlier this autumn. You find them both at Nordregio's website and at the Nordic Council of Ministers. And the second point I would like to make here, apart from that we have to look into what's going on at the regional level, is that we need to have a systemic and a meta-governance approach to understand and map out how different policies can support regions and how different policy areas are mixed into complex governance processes of interlinked institutions, actors, and policy measures taking place at different institutional levels. And this is really complex. And we have to discuss that also good policy measures may contain conflict of goals or have unintended spatial consequences or unintended socioeconomic consequences, whereby they hit specific regions or social groups differently and in a way that was perhaps not intended. And
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. We are kind of on the clock here. So could you take that last point with you into the debate?
Absolutely.
Thank you. For now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to our panelists situated in all the Nordic countries. And now for the debate and our panelists placed all around the Nordic countries. In Helsinki, we have Gunvor Kronman, CEO of Hanaholmen, the Swedish-Finnish Cultural Center, and also a board member of Crisis Management Initiative and Plan International. On the stage here in Copenhagen, I'm accompanied by Paula Lehtomäki, my boss, the Secretary General of the Nordic Council of Ministers. Welcome, Paula. In Oslo, we have Nina Sandberg, member of the Norwegian delegation in the Nordic Council and, of course, member of the Norwegian Parliament, and also the member of the Committee of Welfare in the Nordic region. Welcome to you as well, Nina. In Reykjavik, we have Urdur Einarsdottir, a student council member of the University of Iceland. Welcome to you as well, Urdur. And in Stockholm, we have Johan Hall from Sweden's labor union and Global Utmaning. And of course, Anna Lundgren, who will be joining us in this debate as well. And I'm going to start with you, Nina Sandberg, in Oslo. The Nordic welfare model is a great tool for handling crisis and changes. It's kind of a depressing success history, as we heard Johan Strang say. Do you agree with that?
I agree, but I don't find it depressing. The Nordic countries, both now and post-corona, will have to tackle global heavy trends, challenging both our values and our societies. And the climate crisis is all around us already and should, of course, persistently be on the agenda. However, the same is the rapid technological revolution of digitalization, and the same is true for the growing economic inequalities, migration, polarization, weakened democracy, urbanization, as Anna Lundgren talked about, and also changed demography. So, in the early winter, the world was already in an uncertain place, and then came the corona pandemic. So, so far, it seems that the Nordic region has managed to this well, and we should be well equipped, as you said, to meet a pandemic as society with a relatively low inequality, strong economies, and strong encompassing welfare states. However, this crisis may be prolonged, and the consequences are unsecure. At least, I believe we have to be prepared to see significant declines in the gross domestic products. So the question is, where do we go from here? And I believe I believe the green transition is not going to happen if we depend too heavily on single businesses or individuals to carry it through. The Nordic region has managed to transform earlier due to an underlying political will to set direction for the societal development, to redistribute wealth, and to see the transformation of society as a whole, not fragmented. So I believe we will need the Nordic societies to be offensive as in the past and use their powers to facilitate a green transition. And further, I think nothing is going to happen if we allow already existing economic and other inequalities, nor social differences in health to become deeper and permanent. The green transition, I believe, is dependent on all playing on the same team, an integrated society, as the vision is for the Nordic Council, with low levels of inequality, polarization, and conflict. So I believe the Nordic societies have to keep up their rather good work on redistributing wealth through fair taxes, to avoid a situation where the poorer and less fortunate pay more for a green transition in a society where they have low incomes and unsecure positions. So that's the first.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Nina. Let me bring in the young perspective and Urdur Einarsdottir in Reykjavik. You are a member of the Student Council at the University of Iceland. What is your impression? Are young people in Iceland confident in that our welfare system can handle the need for climate change and a just transition?
Well, not entirely that the welfare system itself can. The government has to follow through with all of the plans that it has made. And we haven't really seen, we have seen a lot of ambitious targets, but we haven't really seen how they would like to implement these targets or implement these plans to work towards the green transition in its sense.
So you are worried they're not doing enough and fast enough to reach the Paris Agreement's goals?
Sorry?
I was asking, are you then worried that we are talking about what we're going to do and we are kind of highlighting our welfare system and our cooperation, but there's a lack of action.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean.
Thank you. Yeah, you want to collaborate on that?
Oh, yeah, no, that's exactly what I mean, yes.
Okay, so let me bring in an organization that has been instrumental for pushing at least the Swedish welfare system forward. Johan Hall, you represent the Swedish Labor Union, LO, and also Global Utmaning. For many years now, we have heard that our welfare system are under pressure. It's too costly, too few are paying for too many. It's not sustainable. We must reduce the cost by cutting social benefits. It seems then that a tool that was once sharp are getting increasingly blunt. How do we sharpen or recalibrate this system to tackle the climate crisis and the needs following that?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that we have to realize that this transformation that we need to go through, become climate friendly, it's also a possibility of creating new jobs. It's not a cost, I would say. It's rather an investment that will make us richer and give people more work and probably also greater income for the state, which will guarantee the welfare state. I think that, I mean, there has been such a success in the Nordic countries during the 20th century, and that's because we have adapted ourselves to development, trying to be at the forefront when it comes to developing new products, new services, new technology, and so on. And that's the way we have been competing on the global market, and that's what has made us rich. I think that what we are now, we are facing the fourth industrial revolution, and I think that climate technology, goods and services will be a big and important part of that. So what we need to discuss is how can we transform our society and our industries to develop into this fourth industrial revolution. And that's more of an investment, I'd say. And I think that when we talk about our success story in the Nordics when it comes to structural change, we have often been good at it, and that we can be proud, because when we talk about just transition, what they usually talk about is what we already have here. We have the possibility to re-educate, to have a decent unemployment insurance and so on. But also, which is important, is an industrial policy. And I think that perhaps what we need is a more focused industrial policy. For a long time, at least in Sweden, I think we had a more general industrial policy saying that whatever is creating economic growth is good. But now I think we have to sharpen it and a little bit more and focus on an industrial policy that can develop our economy into this fourth industrial revolution. Yeah.
And I should say that if any of the panelists want to say something or comment on what the others are saying, please feel free. You just raise your hand and say, I want to say something. And of course, Gunvor Kronman, I was just waiting for you. Please.
Thank you. Well, I actually wanted to comment on what Johan Hall was talking about, because I really truly believe that the private sector and Nordic companies are at the heart of driving also the Nordic sustainability agenda. And most serious Nordic companies have sustainability very, very high on their business agenda. So it's not like they need to be taught by politicians, because not because, or I would say not only because they want to be good citizens, but also because they want to be good citizens, but foremost because it's good business and it's great opportunities for Nordic companies to actually drive economic development, because as the knowledge-based societies we are, and innovation-based societies we have a great deal to offer to the world to solve those global problems that we are facing. And I would like to actually agree with our also Icelandic participant that climate change is probably the biggest intergenerational divide that we have for the time being. And I think we need young leaders, first of all, because the perspective is different. But we also need to understand that it's not only about climate, it's really much, much broader about how we use our resources, how we ensure that equality is still a Nordic value, because there are threats that we can discuss later, and so on. But I think what the politicians can do to facilitate the private sector in driving the sustainability agenda is really to agree on common standards, even better, agree on not only national infrastructure investments that are needed, for example, in the field of electricity and energy development. We need to think not only national, but also regional, and there the politicians have a great role to play to facilitate this process.
I feel we're going to take in Paula Lehtomäki now, and you are, as I said, the Secretary General for the Nordic Council of Ministers, that depressing success story. I want to hear from you on what role your organization can play in this transition towards a green and sustainable future. What is our role?
Well, first of all, I think that your question has a direct link to what Professor Strand mentioned when he asked that whether our new vision of the Nordic region becoming the world's most sustainable and integrated region, is it a branding or is it something else? And I would say, I would illustrate is that as a guidance for us all who are involved in the Nordic cooperation, that it is the Nordic prime ministers that show us the way. What is important in the Nordic cooperation during the coming 10 years? It is sustainability and integration. And that is the goal also within after the 10 years, and we should be the world's most sustainable and integrated. And it is not only about green. This was also a comment that came up earlier in the discussion. It is about being, of course, environmentally sustainable, but also a competence, ability to success in competence, and then to be socially inclusive. That is the third very important part of our work in the coming years. What we can do as a Nordic Council of Ministers is, of course, that as the green transition, which is fair and inclusive, is the core, the heart of the Nordic cooperation, then we can provide a platform, as we heard already earlier, where countries can share and exchange their best practices. But I would also like to see us more and more as a platform where individual ministers for Nordic countries can come and find the solutions to the problems that they are having in their respective countries. We have lots of common challenges, and there are certainly even more common solutions that we can find and utilize together.
I want to go to Gunvor Kronman. Johan Strang, when in his keynote, he said that the Nordic cooperation is so much more than the Nordic Council or the Nordic Council of Ministers. It's businesses, it's a civic society. What would you say? Are the civic society better at cooperating, or is it the politicians and the Secretariat?
Well, that was a difficult question. Maybe one of the comments in Professor Strang's lecture that I really liked was the perspective of the Nordics always been able to build on the ashes of what we have not been able to achieve. So I think we need to accept that we don't always succeed. And if I want to comment the current pandemic situation, I don't think the Nordic cooperation has been at its best, to say the least. But I think what we can do is to learn from that and have honest and open analysis together of what did not work so well and what can we improve in the future. I'm not sure that the civil society is better at Nordic cooperation.
I would say that when it comes to international cooperation, because when you get the helicopter perspective on Nordic cooperation and you are outside the Nordic region and you need to achieve things, you realize how similar our interests are. And cooperation suddenly is much easier. So I worked globally a big part of my life, and I've seen that over again in so many different circumstances. But also, I think really that the private sector is a good example of Nordic cooperation. You mentioned the mobile area, but there are many others as well, because they gain from it. What I think is important is to reassure that the trust our populations have in the Nordic cooperation, because it's amazing. Every time you make the opinion polls about what the populations in the Nordic countries think about neighbors and Nordic cooperation, the level of trust is really high. And even now, after we just at my institution this week published 2 new opinion polls about what we think about each other in terms of populations, and it's even gone up, the trust in each other. It doesn't mean that again the populations think that we have done a great job in cooperating, but the trust it's like money in the bank, I would say, in the Nordic cooperation, and that's something we should really cherish.
Thank you, Gunvor. Paula, you wanted to say something, and then we're going to go to Anna Lundgren in Stockholm.
I would very much like to see the civil society cooperation flourish also on the Nordic level, because what we need as a ground for Nordic cooperation is a sense of belonging together. And I can very well imagine that that doesn't always happen in relation to the Council of Ministers, but most probably in relation to other civil organizations, to other individual Nordic people that you get to learn within the Nordic cooperation. And we are also going to support also financially even more next year and after that, specifically civil society cooperation, also together with the Secretariat.
Anna Lundgren, you had a point that we didn't have time to listen to. But before you get to that, I wanted to ask you about something that Gunvor Kronman said, that the importance of not thinking just nationally, but also regionally when we think the way ahead of towards green transition. How do you see that in Nordego and the state of the Nordic region, which comes out every second year? I mean, how does the benefit of this cooperation kind of come to light in your report?
Thank you. I think, as I mentioned, we're very much departing in the regional analysis at Nordregio, and we have also looked into quite a lot into the cross-border regions and what's going on there. And I think that is clearly a benefit, and to understand the interaction between the regional levels, the national level, and what we're doing on the Nordic level. But I would like to regarding what's been said regarding the Nordic model, I would say that I think the Nordic model can contribute to the green, inclusive, and great Nordic region. If we think about the assets that we have in the Nordic region, we have the Nordic model that was mentioned before, which is truly an asset with its perspective of inclusion and being green. We also have a worried and engaged population when it comes to green transition and to climate change. And that is something that is also an asset that we can take advantage of. And then we have strong institutions, not only the public institutions at the national, regional, and local levels, but also the business sectors. And these are assets that we can make use of and should see as an advantage when we move further to comply with the challenges regarding the green transition. And I think that was mentioned from Iceland here, the necessity of mobilizing. And I think that is a central theme here. How can we mobilize those assets to become more green and more inclusive and to foster the Nordic values?
Thank you, Anna. I was also wondering, because today the Nordic Council of Ministers published a new report in English. It's called Social Sustainability, Green Transition in the Nordics. I think it's only available in Danish so far, but I think it's coming in English as well. In this report, it can be found, or the report can be found on our website, but the report discusses the challenges in different areas when we strive for a green transition. Among other things, it points out the differences between the rural and the urban regions' capacity to handle transitions, where rural regions are more likely to fall behind. How do we meet this challenge? I see, Johan, you have your finger up, please. And Nina as well. I will get to you.
Yeah, well, maybe I'm not having the same picture about the rural areas, because I mean, from a Swedish perspective, when it comes to developing industries that are in line with the demands for a green society. I mean, we have the mining and the steel production up north in Sweden. They're also building a new big battery industry up north. They are talking about bioeconomy, where the forest will be a very important industry in a green economy. So from my perspective, what I see here is rather the rural areas becoming more and more important in this transition into a green economy. And I also think that the digitalization, we haven't talked about that, that's often treated as a special subject, of course, but that will also be a big and important part of greening the economy. That makes it possible for people to live outside the big cities, where we all are facing huge prices for living, and probably not the best air and so on. So maybe the greening of economy will actually boost the rural areas. I see a huge possibility there anyway. Thank you.
I can see everybody's nodding here now. I promised the word to Nina Sandberg in Oslo.
Yeah, thank you. I'm almost certain that the politicians, we do have a huge responsibility to secure the equal access to both knowledge and also competence building to individuals and to businesses and also to regions in order to avoid the major tendency that the ones who have little always take less education, and that is true for individuals and also for firms. So digitalization is one of the major driving forces also for the green transition. And I believe in the Nordic societies, where you have a huge amount of smaller and medium-sized companies, the government would have to facilitate the equal access to the possibility to build competencies, because the smaller companies are already lagging behind. So this is one of the truly important prerequisites, I think, to secure the green transition in the Nordic region. Thank you.
Paula, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just a comment to this, that in which way can we cope with transition. So I truly believe that here the Nordic welfare model can be very much of help. Because why it is difficult with transition for us individuals? It is because we feel ourselves insecure. And so we need to strengthen the security, the feeling of being secure. And that means that we have to have competencies in order to be able to cope with the changes that come, that we trust on our own competencies. And then, of course, it's easier to cope with a transition if you do not need to be worried about whether you have money to buy bread tomorrow or not. So in this sense, welfare state and welfare society can very much be of help in coping with the transition, I believe.
Yes, Johan, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just want to add something. I mean, it's not, we talked about Corona, which has all affected us. And I was thinking that when it comes to digitalization, I think that what we are showing, I'm sitting at home now, I have to work at home because of this, and so many other people doing. I think that what we have actually forced ourselves into this digitalization because of Corona. So we are having this meeting on internet, for instance, and so on, but rather than seeing each other in the same hall or venue. And I think that the digitalization and the possibility to work at home or work outside the big cities, I mean, we can see that possibility now, and I think that many people may use it in the future as well, because it works actually. It's
Thank you, Johan. Urdur Einarsdottir, I would like to ask you. I mean, I'm not saying that Iceland is completely a rural area, but much of it is. How is your generation looking at it I mean, Iceland, or the tourist industry being such a large industry in Iceland, and are you confident that the rural areas will be able to handle the transition, as Johan Hall mentioned?
The transition. Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Are you just as confident as Johan is that the rural areas in the Nordic countries are able to handle or come through the transition in a good way, in a good manner?
Yes, in a way. I mean, because the difference between... I'm sorry, I'm incredibly nervous.
That's fine. Just breathe. It's fine. You're doing great.
Thanks. Well, the rural regions of Iceland depend a lot on tourism. So transitioning to maybe a different type of tourism would benefit the rural areas. But if we're talking about less tourism in contrast to reducing emissions regarding travel, then the rural areas may not come as well out of it. Yeah, so.
Yeah. Thank you. Another question here. I mean, we talk about our welfare system as great, and it's green and it's adjustable, but our welfare system wasn't created yesterday. It has developed for around 100 years. So my question to the panel is, how can we export a system, or is it possible to export a system that takes so long to develop to the level where we are today? Is that possible?
Whom are you asking?
I'm looking at everybody. Feel free. Is it possible? I mean, we're kind of selling it to the world as kind of the Nordic model. Anna, you had your hand up, and now you're all ready to answer. Anna first in Stockholm.
Thank you. I think it's difficult to export models in general. We all have our backpack from history with our institutions that are built very slowly. But we can certainly learn from each other, and we can learn from the other Nordic countries, and we can learn internationally to pick up best practices. And I think that is the way to go about it, rather than to export.
Thank you. We have just a couple of seconds left. So Gunvor, if you can make it short and sweet.
Yes, okay. I think it's a great brand. We can use it to actually open the discussion internationally. And I think now that Joe Biden was elected president in the United States, the US will come back to the climate agenda, but US will not take the leading role, but the Nordics could. because it has to be probably the European Union who will take that role, and it's natural for the Nordics to take that. So I don't think we can export the model, but I think we can inspire and take the lead in the discussion.
Thank you. And then our time was actually up for the discussion. Thank you, everybody. And now we actually open for questions from the audience and also from our online viewers. They are so keen on asking questions here. So I have one here in Copenhagen, and I see one in Helsinki. So I think we're going to start here in Copenhagen. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Nicholas, and my question is, do you think that the Nordic model will be more or less admired in the future? Are we the ones who should look for inspiration elsewhere, or will we be able to motivate, for instance, countries such as the Baltic countries or Scotland even more?
Paula, feel free.
I think that when we talk about Nordic model, we actually talk about the principles and values that it's based on. Equality, having everybody on board, freedom of speech, education for everybody, transparency, well-functioning democracy. It will be appreciated among those people who are appreciating these values and principles. But it doesn't always go with, on the basis of countries, but on individuals.
Thank you. And then we have a question in Helsinki. Please.
Yes. Thank you so much. We've talked a lot about equality, but I'm especially interested in gender equality. So I would love to hear your views on how to take into account and ensure also gender equality when we talk about the green transition. Thank you.
Was that a wish or a request or a question? Who wants to answer?
I would love to hear Gunvor's views, as she is a member of the board of Plan International.
Yes, and I'm becoming the international chair on Saturday. There are many studies. If we talk about the thing globally, we know that those who suffer most from the effects of climate change is girls and women. So I think when it comes to, first of all, to the Nordic countries' development cooperation, this should be a priority. And luckily, in several of the Nordic governments' programs right now, this is a priority. Another thing is that we also know that in sustaining the Nordic model, gender equality is key. And unfortunately, also in the Nordic region, we have forces now that are trying to drag us backwards. I think also we need to combat that trend. Thank you.
Thank you, Gunvor Kronman. Does anyone else want to answer that one? Nina, in Oslo?
Yes, thank you. I would like to point to the fact that we actually see also in our societies that women are suffering from the pandemic in a different way than men. A fact is that women at the universities are more inclined to be at home during the pandemic, and hence they publicate less than the men. Actually, there's a linear connection between those two. So we have to look into our societies and make sure that the pandemic doesn't actually create larger differences between the genders also in the Nordic region. So I would say that I would be less concerned about exporting our model than to make sure that we don't destroy our own model if this crisis is going to be very much prolonged. So thank you.
Okay, and the final word goes to Secretary General Paula Lehtomäki.
Thank you, Andre. Yes, gender equality is of course very much in the core of Nordic cooperation, and I would like to agree with Gunvor that we have to remember that it's not self-evident everywhere in the Nordic region either, not to speak about the world. So therefore, it is important that we keep that high on our agenda.
Thank you. And I don't see any other questions. Yes, we have another question in Helsinki.
Yeah,
Go
hi.
ahead, sir.
Hi, my name is Anna, and my question is about that we know that indigenous knowledge and participation and leadership is actually absolutely crucial for enabling or reaching the Paris Agreement goals. So I'm wondering how we can increase the participation and of the Sami and the Inuit in the Nordic countries and in the Nordic solution making.
Yes, and I think actually, Paula, you want to answer that one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Indigenous peoples, and in particularly in the Arctic area, their welfare and their possibilities to develop their own possibilities to live there and to cope very well with the transition. That is in the core of the Arctic program for the Nordic cooperation. And then we are also cooperating with the Sami Rådet, which is the organization that is for all the Nordic Sami peoples. So definitely it is very important that we, for example, when we talk about the Arctic area, that we are not only talking about these phenomena that exist, but that we are talking about and thinking about the individuals and people who are living there on the area and try to do our best in order to support their welfare.
Thank you. I hope that answered the question. We still have some time, so if there is any other question? No, it doesn't seem like it. So then we have actually reached our destination. This discussion is at its end. And I want to kind of change the scenery here a little bit. I want to give the stage to our keynote listener, because we have had one young gentleman with us these 2 hours, and he's gonna give us some of his insights. Welcome to the stage, Gunnar Skredegaard from the Danish Youth Council.
Yes.
Welcome. We have discussed the Nordic welfare state and if our countries are well equipped to tackle the climate change and the need for green transition. From what you have heard today, are you depressed or hopeful?
I think our models are the best equipped in the world to actually create a sustainable future. And sustainability is not only environmental discrepancy, but it's also economic, financial policies as well. We need both to sustain a policy that would actually benefit people. So I think when it comes to the Nordic welfare models, we'll probably see our models come under strain from international policies, but also actually the models being the best equipped to handle that strain and be the best equipped to transform our economies to be sustainable.
But do you then think that I mean, we have heard earlier today that the welfare model is also under pressure. Mm-hmm. What should we do to kind of relieve that pressure in your mind?
Well, I think that when it comes to our welfare models, one of the biggest pressure points is our changing demographics, that we are getting an older populace, which means that we will see an increase in welfare spending. That's not something, that's just a basic fact. So I think for us as young people, we would have to look at our living standards. We would have to look at reusing stuff, recycling stuff, not buying the newest iPhone every time, but using what we have at our disposal until we've actually worn stuff out. Because we have to look at our living standards, and maybe in solidarity with the world in general, we'll need to lower our living standards and not being used to having the newest of everything.
I heard so many of the young people taking part in today's Choosing Green event saying just that. I didn't hear so many grown-ups, if you like, or old farts like me, using that argument?
Well, the problem is that it's your generation that's gotten used to this living standard, and it's my generation that needs to pay the bill. So
sorry for that.
So basically, we've been footed a bill for something that we haven't created. So when the older generation hasn't stepped up to the table, we can't yell at the older generation. As a young generation, we can say, this is now our table, this is our turn, and we'll do it better.
But do you think then that your generation in general are willing to do just that?
Probably not. But it's us and our children that has to live with the consequences of climate change. So you have the great opportunity that you'll probably die before us. So that means that it's us that's left. That it's us that's left with the bill.
And again, I'm really, really sorry for that.
No worries.
But anyway, during these 2 hours, what do you take with you from this?
I think what I'll take home is that when we look at the Nordic welfare models, we are the countries in the world that has the fewest excuses for actually being able to turn our economy sustainable and to implement environmentally friendly policies. And I think that the Nordic cooperation through the Council of Ministers and the Nordic Council is a forerunner for the incorporation and coordination of policy. So I think that we should be able to take the lead on the world stage, simply not because we need the praise, but because we have the best conditions for doing so.
Do you think we then need to be a little bit more humble? I mean, we talk a lot about the Nordic model in our approach to the world.
No. Because it's the best model. It is simply the best model. The Nordic countries are the best countries to live in the world. So I think we should preach the model. It shouldn't be a missionary that tries to drag our way of living, because we have created our welfare systems on old institutions that have been created through history. And that needs or takes an extreme amount of trust between the people of each nation. That's something we've developed on over 100 of years. So we can't just transport the model, but we can say that our models are the best when it comes to equality, gender equality, finances, social health care, stuff like that.
So trust is the Nordic gold.
Trust is the key, and trust will also be the factor that can actually make the difference in implementing sustainable policies.
Thank you, Lucas. And now we have reached the end of a very long but also super interesting day. And to sum up it all, I would like to invite our head of communication at the Nordic Council of Ministers, Mary Gestrin, and she's already on the stage. Mary, we arranged this event because COP26 was cancelled, but we do hope that all the countries will meet next year. And listening to all that has been said here today, what do you think we can bring with us to the next climate conference?
Well, after 6 hours of very interesting speeches, it's not so easy to say 2 minutes of what we should bring with us. But actually, I think that what Lucas just said was very, very good, and that's a good thing to bring with us. I don't need to repeat that. But other than that, I think that one of the things that I remember from this day is the fact that we maybe should not talk so much about our solutions that are so good, but we should talk about the experiences that we have had when it comes to working towards the Sustainable Development Goals, because others can learn from our experiences and then they will not make the same mistakes that we have made. That, I think, is a very important thing to remember. Also, I think that it's important for us to remember this thing about leaving no one behind. Climate justice was mentioned many, many times during this day, and I think that is an important thing for us to bring with us to COP21 26 as well. The issue about our responsibility as a very, very rich region to really think about others than ourselves is also, I think, a core thing for us to remember. One thing that we also discussed today is how we report on our progress, how we report on the progress that has been made, also how we report about the progress that did not happen, because that is also very important, that we as a region follow up on what we have said that we will do, and that we report in a transparent way about that.
Built on the ashes.
Yes, exactly. And finally, actually, what was asked here from Helsinki now, and that was mentioned many times today, is that we cannot forget the indigenous people. That's very important for us, that we really remember that they actually suffer a lot due to the climate change. So we have to remember them when we think about what to take with us to COP26.
Thank you, Mary. And now it's time to say goodbye. And thank you all for being with us today. And hopefully next time we stand on a stage and talk about climate change, it will be at the UN Climate Conference. Thank you and good night.